Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Wednesday, March 5th, and for today's headlines we have: hoping to revive mammoths, scientists create woolly mice. Vance's comments about European peacekeeping plan for Ukraine draw ire abroad. As measles spread, Kennedy embraces remedies like cod liver oil. New York State police investigate death of another inmate at upstate prison. Trump's trade war could be his biggest economic gamble. Hoping to revive mammoths, scientists create woolly mice. Scientists have genetically engineered mice with some key characteristics of an extinct animal that was far larger, the woolly mammoth. This woolly mouse marks an important step towards achieving the researchers' ultimate goal, bringing a woolly mammoth-like creature back from extinction, they say. For us, it's an incredibly big deal, said Beth Shapiro, Chief Science Officer at Colossal Biosciences, a Dallas company trying to resurrect the woolly mammoth and other extinct species. The company announced the creation of the woolly mice Tuesday in a news release and posted a scientific paper online detailing the achievement. Scientists implanted genetically modified embryos in female lab mice that gave birth to the first of the woolly pups in October. This is really validation that what we have in mind for our long-term de-extinction project is really going to work, Shapiro told NPR in an interview. The company says reviving extinct species like the mammoth, the dodo, and others could help repair ecosystems. Critics, however, question whether de-extinction would be safe for the animals or environment. Shapiro and her colleagues started by trying to identify the genes responsible for making mammoths distinctive. They compared ancient samples of genetic material from mammoths with genetic sequences of African and Asian elephants, the mammoth's closest living relative. These included long woolly hair and a way of metabolizing fat that helped the animal survive well in the cold. And then we look in the mouse for those same genes in instances where those genes have involved with making a woolly coat or longer hair or changing the color of the hair, Shapiro says. The researchers used the latest genetic engineering techniques to make a combination of modifications based on what they found in the mammoth's genomes and mouse DNA, in the hopes that changes would produce the desired attributes in the offspring. And the experiment appears to have worked. We ended up with some absolutely adorable mice that have longer, woolly, golden-colored coats, Shapiro says. The mice also have similar to the mammoth, Colossal says, enabling them to survive in cold weather. This is exciting to us because it confirms that the genes and gene family that we identified using our comparative genomics approach really do cause an animal to have a woolly coat and a golden coat and longer hairs, Shapiro says. And this is the way that we're going to create mammoths for the future. They hope to do that by editing the genes of the embryos of Asian elephants and implanting the modified embryo into female elephants so that they can give birth to calves with a key trait that made the mammoths distinctive. Other researchers say the woolly mice are exciting. I'm pretty skeptical about this, but the mouse is pretty adorable, says Vincent Lynch, professor of biology at the University of Buffalo. And for people like me who want to understand the genetic basis of traits, this is particularly impressive. But Lynch and others caution, a mouse is not an elephant, so who knows if they could do the same thing with that species. And even if they could, Lynch is among those who don't think bringing back the mammoth is a great idea. The money would be better spent saving species on the brink of extinction, critics say. The focus of de-extinction or genome-modified organisms as a conservation tool, I believe, is a distraction from the work that needs to be done to conserve species, says Gabrielle Mastromonaco, Senior Director at Wildlife Sciences at the Toronto Zoo. There are species disappearing every day. In addition, who knows what unintended consequences could result from introducing herds of mammoth-like elephants into the Arctic. They sort of want to mess around on a pretty large scale, says Carl Flessa, a professor of geosciences at the University of Arizona. I don't know what the downside of having a bunch of hairy Asian elephants stomping around in the tundra might be. I don't know what would happen. They don't know what would happen. They can't really assure me that, everything will be just fine. Everything will be like it was back in the Pleistocene. I'm not ready to play God like that. For their part, Shapiro and her colleagues defend their project. They say reintroducing mammoth-like creatures could benefit the environment by helping repair ecosystems where the mammoth once lived. Our intention is to recreate these extinct species that played really important roles in ecosystems that are missing because they've become extinct, Shapiro says. In addition, the technologies the company is developing could be used to try to protect living species, says Ben Lamb, Colossal co-founder and CEO. Current conservation models work. They just don't work at the speed at which we're changing the planet and eradicating species, Lamb says. So we need new tools and technologies so we can engineer life in a better way that's more adaptable to be coexistent with humans. It also hopes to produce mammoth-like Asian elephant embryos by next year and their first calves by 2028. The company is also working on bringing back the dodo bird and the Tasmanian tiger. Vance's comments about European peacekeeping plan for Ukraine draw ire abroad. Vice President Vance is defending himself Tuesday after triggering a furious reaction for suggesting that a protocol to put European peacekeepers in Ukraine would not be enough to prevent Russia from invading again. During an interview with Fox News, Vance said that a better security guarantee for Ukraine was for Kyiv to sign a proposed critical minerals deal with Washington. If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine, Vance told Fox's Sean Hannity in an interview broadcast Monday night. That is a better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The interview followed Friday's confrontational White House meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, where they were set to discuss and potentially sign a deal that would give the U.S. access to Ukraine's critical minerals. President Trump called off the signing, charging that Zelensky was not ready for peace. On Capitol Hill on Tuesday, Vance said the deal is still possible. I think the president is still committed to the mineral deal. I think we've heard some positive things, but not yet, of course. The signature from our friends in Ukraine, he told reporters. Zelensky posted on X that the White House meeting did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time and in any convenient format, he wrote Tuesday. We see this agreement as a step towards greater security and solid security guarantees, and I truly hope it will work effectively. The Trump administration argues that the deal would give Ukraine more economic security and ensure U.S. interests in physical security against Russian aggression. Backlash from allies abroad. Soon after the Fox interview aired Monday night, Vance's comments were circulating overseas across Europe. Current and former European leaders quickly responded, with some seeing them as a swipe against the proposed British and French-led peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. James Cartledge, a conservative British lawmaker who serves as the opposition party's shadow defense secretary, called Vance's comments deeply disrespectful. Britain and France came to the United States' aid, deploying thousands of personnel to Afghanistan, including my own brother and numerous parliamentary colleagues, past and present. It's deeply disrespectful to ignore such service and sacrifice, Cartledge wrote on X. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron had pushed for a more specific security backstop beyond the mineral deal. Vance later took to social media, where he called it absurdly dishonest to argue that he had been referring to the UK or France, despite the two countries leading the effort. I don't even mention the UK or France in the clip, both of whom have fought bravely alongside the US over the last 20 years and beyond, he wrote. But let's be direct, there are many countries who are voluntarily, privately or publicly, support, who have neither the battlefield experience nor the military equipment to do anything meaningful. As measles spread, Kennedy embraces remedies like cod liver oil. In an interview, the HHS secretary claimed that unconventional treatments were helping patients but did not mention vaccination. As the measles outbreak expands in West Texas, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary, on Tuesday, cheered several unconventional treatments, including cod liver oil, but again did not urge Americans to get vaccinated. In a pre-recorded interview that aired on Fox News, Mr. Kennedy said the federal government was shipping doses of vitamin A to Gaines County, the epicenter of the outbreak, and helping to arrange ambulance rides. HHS officials previously said they were shipping doses of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine to Texas, but Mr. Kennedy did not discuss vaccinations. Texas doctors have seen very, very good results, Mr. Kennedy claimed, by treating measles cases with steroid busulfan, an antibiotic called clarithromycin, and cod liver oil, which he said had high levels of vitamin A and vitamin D. While physicians sometimes administer doses of vitamin A to treat children with severe measles cases, cod liver oil is by no means an evidence-based treatment, said Dr. Sean Leary, chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Infectious Diseases. Dr. O'Leary added that he had never heard of physicians using the supplement against measles. In comments that seemed to refer to conventional measures against measles, Mr. Kennedy said, "We're going to be honest with the American people for the first time in history about all of the tests and all the studies, about what we know and what we don't know. We're going to tell them, and that's going to anger some people who want an ideological approach to public health. In addition, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced on Tuesday that it would help send some of its disease detectives to Texas to help bolster the effort to turn back the virus. The outbreak shows no signs of slowing, according to data released on Tuesday by state health officials. The Texas Department of Health reported that since late January, nearly 160 people have contracted measles, 20 more cases than reported on Friday, and 22 have been hospitalized. The news comes amid criticism of federal officials for underplaying the need for immunizations with the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, one of the most important tools in quelling an outbreak. The dimensions of the outbreak, which has already killed one child, are unclear. The official case number at the Texas outbreak is most likely an undercount, says Catherine Wells, the director of public health in Lubbock, Texas. The outbreak has largely spread within a community of Mennonites in Gaines County, who historically have had lower vaccination rates and often avoid interacting with the healthcare system. Mr. Wells says she believes many of those families did not seek medical attention for measles and have not been accounted for in the state's official numbers. I think it's probably in the hundreds, she said. We know that some of the schools were closed and lots of sick children, but we don't know who those children are. Last year, roughly 82% of the county's kindergarten population had received the measles vaccine. Experts say that at least 95% of people in the community must be vaccinated in order to stave off outbreaks. Declining vaccination rates in the United States have left growing pockets of vulnerable children, making it more likely that an outbreak will jump from one unvaccinated group to another. Just 93% of kindergarten students nationwide had received the vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella in the 2023-2024 school year, down from 95% before the pandemic. We've benefited greatly as Americans by the fact that these communities have been spaced out, said Michael Mina, a vaccine expert and former professor of epidemiology at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. In case one of them can ignite cases in all of them because you're no longer benefiting from this space, he said. In Texas, measles cases have been confirmed in 9 counties, many of which have vaccination rates below federal recommendations. About 80% of kindergarten students in one of the public school districts in Terry County, which neighbors Gaines, were vaccinated for measles, according to a recent state data. That county reported 22 cases of measles Tuesday. A county in New Mexico that borders Gaines County has reported 9 measles cases. While most measles cases resolve in a few weeks, in rare cases the virus can cause pneumonia, making it difficult for patients, especially children, to get oxygen in their lungs or brain swelling, which can lead to blindness, deafness, and intellectual disabilities. About 1 in 5 people who catch measles will be hospitalized, according to the CDC. The virus also weakens the immune system in the long term, making its host more susceptible for future infections. A 2015 study found that, before the MMR vaccine was widely available, measles may have been responsible for up to half of all infectious disease deaths in children. New York State police investigate death of another inmate at upstate prison. 11 correction workers were placed on leave after a 22-year-old inmate at Mid-State Correctional Facility died. Inmates said he was viciously beaten by prison guards. The state police are investigating the death of a prisoner over the weekend in a facility near the Central New York prison where another inmate was fatally beaten by guards in December. Prison officials said on Saturday that an inmate at Mid-State Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison in Marcy, New York, near Utica, was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital earlier in the day. Officials released no additional details about the circumstances surrounding his death, but 9 prisoners interviewed by the New York Times on Sunday, 7 of whom agreed to have their names used, said the inmate had been brutally beaten by corrections officers. Their accounts could not be independently confirmed, and Thomas Maley, a prison spokesperson, said the death was under investigation. 11 correction staff members involved in the incident were placed on administrative leave while the investigation proceeds, Mr. Maley said. A spokeswoman for the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, said her office was conducting a preliminary assessment of the death. Deaths that appear to be from other than national causes or a known medical condition are investigated by the Office of Attorney General and the New York State Police and the State Corrections Department Office of Special Investigations, Mr. Maley said. A spokeswoman for Governor Kathy Hochul did not respond to requests for comment on Sunday, and a spokesman for the Corrections Officer Union said he had no information about the death. Officials did not release the inmate's name, but his father confirmed on Monday that the man who died was Messiah Natui, 22. Mr. Natui was entered custody in May and was serving a 5-year sentence for second-degree criminal possession of a weapon, according to official records. His death followed that of another prisoner, 43-year-old Robert Brooks, who died on December 9th at Marcy Correctional Facility across the street from Mid-State. 10 of officers have been criminally charged in Mr. Brooks' death. 6 of them with murder, after they were captured on body-worn cameras beating and choking him in the infirmary. The latest fatality, comes amid a mounting crisis in the New York State prison system, where wildcat strikes by thousands of correction officers are expected to enter a third week. It is also the 5th death in prison system since the strikes began. At least one of the deaths was a suicide. Corrections officers at nearly all the state's 42 prisons, including Mid-State, have been on strike since February 17th without the backing of their union and in defiance of a judge's order to protest what they say are dangerous working conditions, severe staffing shortages, and forced overtime. The state's corrections commissioner, Daniel F. Marsuchello III, announced on X that he was giving the officers until Monday to return to work. Some prisoners' rights advocates have accused officers of engaging in the strikes to try to distract attention from the beating death of Mr. Brooks. Ms. Hochul ordered thousands of National Guard soldiers deployed to replace the prison officers. A death at Mid-State occurred on Saturday morning, as members of the National Guard were preparing to conduct a security check in a housing area to make sure all the prisoners were accounted for, said the 9 prisoners interviewed by the Times, who described the death in unusually graphic detail. Inmates, many of whom fear retaliation for prison guards, are often reluctant to speak out about allegations of brutality behind bars. Mr. Nantwi, they said, became upset when the count was set to begin and left the shower area of the dorm, where he could be heard crying. One prisoner, Rodney Richards, said Mr. Nantwi appeared to be having a disagreement with the National Guard members who were filling in for the striking officers and had refused to go to his cubicle. Several prisoners said he had stopped taking his psychiatric medications. In response, the Guard members alerted a group of correction officers known as a Correctional Emergency Response Team, the prisoner said, noting that anywhere from 7 to 15 officers responded, some already wielding their batons. Jordan McLinn, who said his cubicle was near Mr. Nantwi's, said he could hear the blows landing on his body. He was screaming, Mr. McLinn, 26, said. I kept hearing stop resisting, and at one point you could just hear something being hit. Another prisoner, Aaron Perry, 34, said Mr. Nantwi had begged the prisoner guards to stop beating him. He said, I didn't do anything, Mr. Perry recalled. You're really hurting me. Stop. Some of the prisoners said the responding officers did not appear to be wearing body-worn cameras. Others said the few of the officers had them, but they were turned off. 4 of the prisoners interviewed said they saw a corrections sergeant with either a handheld or body-worn camera, but that he was facing away from the attack. Members of the National Guard who did not wear body cameras stood by looking on, the prisoners said. None intervened. The New York National Guard did not respond to a request for comment on Sunday. After the beating, the prisoner said Mr. Nantwi, who had been handcuffed and shackled, was dragged down the hall and down a flight of stairs, his face bloodied and swollen. Mr. Richards said Mr. Nantwi was not recognizable. One of the prisoners, Michael Hummel Parker, 32, said Mr. Nantwi was making gurgly noises, a sign, he said, that he could not breathe. Jared Crosby, 42, another inmate, said he could see from his cell window either officers or medical workers giving Mr. Nantwi CPR inside an ambulance. Inside the housing area, inmates were ordered to clean up the blood, they said. A bloody mop and Mr. Nantwi's belongings were removed from the facility, the prisoner said. Within hours, investigators were interviewing witnesses. Mr. Richards, 43, said the beating he witnessed had left him uneasy. I fear for my life, he said. I don't know what's going to happen. Trump's trade war could be his biggest economic gamble. President Trump had offered a mix of reasons for upending global trade relations, baffling and angering America's biggest trading partners. President Trump made one of the biggest gambles of his presidency Tuesday by initiating sweeping tariffs with no clear rationale on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, triggering a trade war that risked undermining the United States economy. His actions have upended diplomatic relations with America's largest trading partners, sent markets tumbling, and provoked retaliation on U.S. products, leaving businesses, investors, and economists puzzled as to why Mr. Trump would create such upheaval without extending negotiations or clear reasoning. Mr. Trump has offered up a variety of explanations for the tariffs, saying they are punished for other countries' failure to stop drugs and migrants from flowing into the United States, a way to force manufacturing back to America, and retribution for countries that take advantage of the United States. On Tuesday, he cited Canada's hostility towards American banks as another reason. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said it was difficult to understand Mr. Trump's rationale for the tariffs, but posed that his intent was to cripple Canada. What he wants to see is a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that will make it easier to annex us, Mr. Trudeau said during a news conference on Tuesday. That's never going to happen. We will never be the 51st state. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, said Tuesday afternoon that the president might reach some sort of accommodation with Canada and Mexico and announce it on Wednesday. I think he's going to figure out, you do more, and I'll meet you in the middle some way, Mr. Lutnick said. Canada announced a series of retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of American imports, said Mr. Trudeau, said that other non-tariff measures were forthcoming. Yeah, he can do damage to the Canadian economy, but he is going to rapidly find out, as American families are going to rapidly find out. It's going to hurt people on both sides of the border, Mr. Trudeau said. Stock markets around the world slumped. In the United States, the financial sector was one of the worst hit, alongside a host of companies including cruise lines and big tech firms. The S&P 500 fell as much as 2% before moderating losses in the afternoon. The dip added to Monday's 1.8% loss, which is its sharpest decline this year. The bet that Mr. Trump appears to be making is that America is so economically strong and critical to the international commerce that he can deploy tariffs as a crutch to solve nearly every problem. But Mr. Trump's blend of mercantilism and bullying tactics risk disabling the U.S. economy that is battered by 3 years of inflation and now faces slowing growth. The president is imposing steep import taxes on America's largest trading partners at a moment when inflation has yet to come fully under control, a decision that many economists say will further raise costs for American households and hinder economic growth. The American people are counting on President Trump to bring down costs and show the U.S. economy, said Michael Hansen, Senior Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at the Retail Industry Leaders Association. Tariffs on Canada and Mexico put these goals in serious jeopardy and risk destabilizing the North American economy. Anxious business groups were holding emergency meetings on Tuesday to determine the responses to the trade moves, which imposed a 25% tariff on products from Canada and Mexico and add another 10% tariff to previous levies on China. Some groups were considering taking legal action to challenge the national security authority that the Trump administration is invoking to enact the tariffs. Others were trying to grapple with what that would mean for their bottom lines. The retailer Target warned on Tuesday that tariffs could hurt its effort to recover from a tough 2024, saying that consumers could pull back on spending amid wider uncertainty about the economy, and the company could raise prices for some products as early as this week. The chief executive of Best Buy, Corey Barry, said on a conference call that price increases were highly unlikely, but it was difficult to say how big they would be. Kathy Bostjanek, chief economist at Nationwide, estimated that if the tariffs were maintained and retaliation continued, economic growth would be a full percentage point lower than it would otherwise have been. That would suggest that the U.S. economy would only grow 1% by 2025. In 2024, it grew 2.5%. Ms. Bostjanek also estimated that tariffs could prompt price hikes on everyday items that would cost households an additional $1,000 a year on average. Some businesses and unions that would benefit from the tariffs praised them. The United Auto Workers Union said they were glad to see the American president take aggressive action on ending the free trade disaster that has dropped like a bomb on the working class. And Mr. Trump showed no signs of backing down on Tuesday, saying companies could simply avoid the tariffs if they built their factories in the United States. If a company moves to the United States, there are not tariffs, Mr. Trump wrote on Truth Social on Tuesday. Hours later, Mr. Trump warned that if Canada retaliated with its own higher tariffs, the United States would increase its reciprocal tariff by the same amount. Mr. Trump's top economic aides tried to explain the decision on Tuesday. Mr. Lutnick said on CNBC that the tariffs were not a trade war, calling the conflict a drug war instead. If Canada and Mexico can prove to the president they can stop the flow of fentanyl, then of course the president can remove these tariffs, the Commerce Secretary said. But he said the United States had not seen a statistically relevant reduction of deaths in America. Official statistics show that U.S. overdose deaths have declined significantly over the 12 months ending in September, and crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border have plummeted. Mr. Lutnick said the president would be taking another trade-related action against Canada and Mexico in April. Canada and Mexico have an invitation to trade with the amazing economy and the United States of America, and they have abused that invitation, Mr. Lutnick said. Everett Essenstadt, a partner at Squire Batten Boggs and a former economic advisor to Mr. Trump, said the president appeared dissatisfied with the other country's progress on combating drug trafficking, but he might have other aims. I think it's about the fentanyl, but it's about a broader picture too, he said. Mr. Trudeau, along with the President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, implied the administration was creating false pretexts for the tariffs. After ticking off a list of Mexico's recent successes in cracking down on drug trafficking, Ms. Sheinbaum rejected what she called the fentanyl argument invoked by Mr. Trump to justify the imposition of the tariffs. For humanitarian reasons, we cooperate to prevent the illegal trafficking of drugs into the United States, she said in a statement. However, as we've stated on many occasions, the government of that country must also take responsibility for the opioid crisis that has caused so many deaths in the United States. Mr. Trudeau called Mr. Trump's rationale completely bogus, completely unjustified, and completely false. One of Mr. Trump's primary goals for tariffs is to force more domestic manufacturing. He also views trade deficits as American subsidies to other countries and believes that tariffs can help offset the cost of tax cuts and help pay down the $36 trillion national debt. Tariffs are likely to encourage some companies to open factories in the United States to serve American customers, but Canada, Mexico, and China have also announced plans to retaliate against U.S. exports, hitting a broad swath of American sectors, including agriculture, retail, and automobiles. The economic impact of tariffs depends largely on how global trade shifts to account for the increased costs and how consumers adapt. Citing the diversion of the trade to Vietnam and Mexico during Mr. Trump's trade war in his first administration, economist Pantheon Macroeconomics predict these tariffs will lead to a decline in share of the U.S. imports from Mexico to 13%, a drop of 2 percentage points. They also expect U.S. imports from Canada to fall to 10%. John C. Williams, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, warned on Tuesday that tariffs would likely lead to higher U.S. prices, but that the magnitude was highly uncertain. Speaking at an event hosted by Bloomberg, he said he was starting to factor in the impact of tariffs on inflation, because I think we will see some of those effects later this year. Mr. Williams stressed that the Fed was also paying close attention to how tariffs would affect economic activity, including if businesses continue to invest or if consumers continue to spend. That's what I think another big uncertainty is, he said. Mr. Trump is likely correct in his calculation that tariffs will hurt American trading partners more than the United States, because the United States is such a big country with diverse resources, it is far less dependent on trade than many other advanced economies. The tariffs would also strengthen the U.S. dollar, which is the world's reserve currency, making imports seem cheaper and blunting some of the impacts of the levies. Trade in goods and services accounts for about a quarter of U.S. economic activity, compared with roughly 70% for Mexico and Canada and 37% for China. Canada and Mexico both send about 80% of their exports to the United States, making them extremely dependent on the United States. Foreign governments have already reacted to the threat of Mr. Trump's tariffs by quietly working to diversify their trade relationships, seeking out partners other than the United States. Mexico has updated its trade agreement with the European Union and pushed forward to trade talks with Brazil. Europe reached a separate agreement with South American countries and with Switzerland. Still, the negative impacts of tariffs are likely unavoidable, particularly for Canada and Mexico. An analysis by the Peterson Institute for International Economics in February found that a 25% tariff on all U.S. imports from Canada and Mexico, matched by similar tariffs from those countries, would cause the U.S. economy to shrink in the coming years, though the Canadian and Mexican economies would shrink more. The tariffs drew a quick condemnation from Democrats in Congress, while Republicans strained to defend them. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, said Mr. Trump's tariffs were oriented around specific objectives in this case, to reduce the amount of fentanyl coming in this country across our borders, and so these tariffs, I think, are hopefully temporary. However, when it's all said and done, it won't be something that will create a lot of disruption, he said. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, also said he hoped that the tariffs wouldn't persist for an extended period of time. Texas has done an enormous amount of trade with both Mexico and Canada, Mr. Cruz said, so my hope is these tariffs act as an incentive that President Trump said they were designed to be. That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye!